Most people believe scary stories are just fiction, something you hear around a campfire or watch in movies. But the truth is far darker. Tonight, you're about to hear 3 real stories so disturbing, so terrifying, that they will crawl under your skin and never leave. These aren't made-up tales. These happened to real people, and they could happen to anyone ever knew. It was the summer of 2017 when this happened. The person who shared this story was a 21-year-old college student who had just finished her semester and decided to spend the break at her grandmother's house in a small rural town. It was one of those quiet towns where everybody seemed to know each other, and people often left their doors unlocked during the day. To her, it felt safe. Almost too safe. Her grandmother's house was an old 2-story place on the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods. The air always smelled like pine, and at night, the crickets and owls filled the silence. She loved it there. But what she didn't realize was that this summer would change the way she thought about safe places forever. On her second night, she was lying in bed, scrolling on her phone, when she noticed something strange. From her window, she could see the edge of the woods, and there seemed to be a figure standing just beyond the tree line. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor, or maybe just her eyes playing tricks on her. But the longer she stared, the clearer it became. It was a man. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, almost blending into the shadows, staring directly toward her window. Her heart began to race. She quickly shut her curtains and convinced herself not to it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone was just passing through the woods. She eventually fell asleep, though uneasily. The next morning, she mentioned it to her grandmother. But her grandmother brushed it off, saying it was probably just a hunter or a local farmer. That explanation made sense at first, so she tried to forget about it. But that night, it happened again. This time, she saw him more clearly. The man was tall, wearing what looked like a dark jacket, and again, he was just standing there at the edge of the woods. No flashlight, no movement, no reason to be there, just watching. She felt frozen in fear, unable to move away from the window. Then, slowly, the man raised his arm and waved at her. Not a friendly wave, more like a slow, unsettling gesture that sent chills down her spine. She backed away from the window, slammed the curtains shut, and locked her bedroom door. She didn't sleep much that night. The following day, her grandmother noticed how tired she looked and asked what was wrong. When she explained what she saw again, her grandmother frowned this time. She admitted that there had been some strange things happening in town recently. Rumors of a man walking around late at night, peeking into windows, even knocking on doors, but disappearing before anyone could catch him. Nobody knew who he was. That night, the girl decided she wouldn't sleep in her bedroom upstairs. Instead, she stayed in the living room, where she could close all the blinds and feel a little safer. She stayed up late, watching TV to distract herself. Sometime after midnight, she heard a sound outside. It was faint at first, just the crunching of leaves, like footsteps slowly moving through the yard. She muted the TV and listened. The footsteps grew louder, circling around the house. Her chest tightened. She turned off the lights, crouched down low, and peeked through the blinds. And there he was, the same man, now standing in the yard. But this time, he was much closer. She could see his face, or at least parts of it. His skin was pale, his eyes wide, and he had this unsettling grin, as if he knew she was watching. He didn't move for what felt like forever, just standing there, smiling. Finally, he walked slowly toward the front porch. She backed away from the window, trying not to make a sound. Then came the creak of the wooden steps. He was right outside the door. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator about what was happening. The dispatcher told her to stay quiet and that an officer was on the way. Meanwhile, the man began rattling the doorknob. It wasn't locked. She had forgotten to lock it earlier, in complete panic. She rushed forward and held the knob tightly, keeping the door from opening. On the other side, she could feel the man pulling, pushing, trying to get in. She screamed for her grandmother, who rushed downstairs in terror. Together, they pushed a heavy chair against the door to block it. The rattling stopped. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then came the slow, deliberate sound of fingernails scratching against the wood of the door. It was the kind of sound that made your stomach twist. After what felt like an eternity, the scratching stopped. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the woods but found nothing, no footprints, no sign of where he went. For the rest of the summer, she never saw him again. But every night, she made sure the doors were locked, the windows shut, and the curtains drawn. Years later, when she looks back at that summer, she can still picture the man's pale face staring at her through the window and the sound of his fingernails dragging across the door. She says she'll never forget it. It was the winter of 2014, when a young man named Chris decided to take a long drive after a stressful week. He had just finished a grueling set of exams at university and wanted nothing more than a quiet weekend away from people. He packed a small bag, filled his car with gas, and drove out to the countryside. His plan was simple: rent a small cabin on the outskirts of a forest, spend the weekend alone, and reset his mind. The cabin was about 40 minutes away from the nearest town. It wasn't luxurious by any means, just a small wooden house with one bedroom, a bathroom, and a fireplace. But it was surrounded by nothing but trees, and that solitude was exactly what he wanted. The first day was peaceful. Chris lit a fire, made himself some food, and spent the evening reading. Outside, the forest was silent except for the occasional sound of wind rushing through the branches. But when night fell, he started to notice something strange. Around midnight, he heard what sounded like footsteps outside. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was probably a deer or some other animal. But the sound didn't quite match. It wasn't four-legged scampering. It was heavy, deliberate, like boots pressing into the snow. Chris stood by the window, peeking through the curtain, but saw nothing, just the pale glow of the moon reflecting off the snow. Still, the unease lingered. The following night, the footsteps came again. This time they lasted longer, circling the cabin slowly, almost as if someone was inspecting it. Chris felt a shiver run through him. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, and the cabin was remote. Who would be out there? He kept the lights off and crouched low, peeking outside. For a brief second, he saw movement between the trees. A figure, someone tall, wearing a coat, standing still, just beyond the edge of the forest. And then, as quickly as he saw it, the figure stepped back into the shadows. Chris told himself. He was imagining things. Stress, exhaustion, isolation. It was easy to let your mind play tricks in a place like this. But the next day, he found something that confirmed it wasn't just in his head. Near the cabin, in the snow, were footprints. Human footprints. They circled the entire cabin and stopped right at his front door. Panic sank in. He checked the lock on the door twice and kept his phone nearby. That night, he barely slept. Every creak of the wooden cabin made him jump. At around 3 a.m., he woke up to a new sound, a faint tapping. At first, he thought it was coming from the roof, maybe a branch swaying in the wind. But then he realized it wasn't random. It was steady. Tap, 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 against the window. His heart started pounding. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound, and in the faint glow of moonlight, he saw a silhouette pressed against the glass. A man's face, pale, expressionless, his breath fogging up the window. Chris froze, unable to move. The man didn't knock or try to speak. He just stood there, tapping his finger against the glass in a slow, unnerving rhythm. Chris finally snapped out of it and grabbed the fire poker from beside the fireplace. He shouted at the man to leave, trying to sound braver than he felt. But the figure didn't move. He just kept tapping. Finally, Chris called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher told him to stay inside and that a unit was on the way. While on the phone, Chris turned back toward the window and the man was gone. The silence was almost worse than the tapping. He locked himself in the bedroom, clutching the poker, waiting. Minutes felt like hours. When the police finally arrived, they searched the area but found no one. However, they did find something disturbing. Outside the window, in the snow, were handprints smeared across the glass, as if the man had been pressing his face and hands against it for a long time. The officers told Chris that he was lucky that the cabin had strong locks, because whoever was out there seemed determined to get inside. They offered to let him stay at a motel in town, but Chris, shaken and exhausted, decided to pack his things immediately and leave. He drove through the night, back to the safety of the city, his heart still racing. When he finally got home, he sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes before he could bring himself to go inside. To this day, he says the most haunting part of the experience wasn't the tapping or even the face at the window. It was the realization that whoever that man was, he had been circling the cabin for nights, watching, waiting, and choosing the perfect moment to make himself known. And Chris never found out who he was or what he wanted. It was late October of 2019 when a young woman named Emily moved into her first apartment alone. It was a small place in the city, not fancy, but cozy enough for her new life. She was proud of her independence, even if the building itself was a little old and creaky. Her friends teased her about how the hallways looked straight out of a horror movie, but Emily always laughed it off. The first few weeks were normal. She worked her job during the day, came home at night, and spent evenings cooking or scrolling on her phone. But then, strange things started to happen. Small at first. She would come home and find her kitchen cabinet slightly open when she swore she had closed it. Her TV would turn on to static in the middle of the night, though she chalked it up to bad wiring. One evening, she was taking out the trash when she felt someone watching her. She turned around quickly, but the hallway was empty. Only the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights filled the air. She shook it off, but she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Slow, dragging footsteps. At first, she thought it was just one of her neighbors, but the steps didn't continue down the hall. They stopped right in front of her door. She stood frozen, listening. Then came the sound of a low whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but it was clear someone was standing right outside, speaking softly to themselves. Emily's hands trembled as she double-checked her lock. She didn't sleep much that night. The following day, she asked her neighbors if they had heard or seen anything unusual. None of them had. One older neighbor simply said, "This building's been weird for years," and left it at that. Emily tried to brush it off until a few nights later, when things escalated. She had just finished a late shift at work and came home around midnight. As she unlocked her door, she noticed something on the floor: an envelope. No stamp, no name, just a plain white envelope slipped under her door. Curious, but nervous, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words written in jagged handwriting. "I see you." Her heart dropped. She rushed inside, locked every bolt, and sat shaking on her couch. Who could have put it there? None of her friends knew her exact apartment number, and she had only been living there a short while. The next few days, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She stopped, leaving her curtains open, and avoided the hallway as much as possible. But things only got worse. One night, she woke up to the sound of something moving in her living room. At first she thought maybe she had left the TV on, but when she listened closely, she realized it was breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. She grabbed her phone, heart pounding, and quietly dialed 911. The operator told her to stay on the line and hide somewhere safe until officers arrived. She crawled under her bed, whispering what was happening. The operator asked if she was sure someone was inside. And then, over the phone, the operator heard it too, a floorboard creaking loudly in the background. Emily clamped her hand over her mouth, praying the intruder wouldn't find her. She could see shadows moving from the crack beneath her bedroom door. She thought she was going to die right there, trapped and helpless. Finally, she heard pounding on the front door. Please. The intruder bolted. By the time the officers got inside, the apartment was empty. But what they found made Emily sick to her stomach. In her living room, on the coffee table, was another piece of paper. This one read, "Next time, no hiding." The police searched the entire building but couldn't find who had done it. They told Emily to stay somewhere else for the night. She went to a friend's place, still shaking, unable to sleep. The next day, with daylight streaming through the windows, she returned with officers to pack some of her things. That's when they made a chilling discovery. Inside the bedroom closet, wedged behind her clothes, was a small space in the wall where the drywall had been broken. It led to a narrow crawl space that ran between apartments. And in that crawl space, they found a blanket, some food wrappers, and a set of footprints in the dust. Whoever had been tormenting Emily hadn't just been slipping notes under her door. They had been living in the walls of her apartment, watching her every move, waiting for the right time. Emily moved out immediately. She never went back to that apartment years later. She still says the most disturbing part wasn't the notes or the night she hid under the bed. It was realizing that while she went about her life, cooking, sleeping, even laughing with friends on the phone, someone was right there, only a few feet away, hidden in the walls, listening, and she'll never know how long he had been there. If you've made it this far, then you know one thing for sure: sometimes the scariest stories aren't from movies or ghost tales. They're real. They happen to ordinary people who never expected their lives to turn into a nightmare. Tonight, you heard 3 disturbing and true terrifying stories, each one a reminder that danger can be closer than we think. A stranger outside your window, a face in the dark tapping on the glass, or someone quietly living in the walls of your own home. The next time you walk alone at night, hear footsteps behind you, or notice something just slightly out of place in your house, remember these stories. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it isn't. If these stories kept you on edge, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you love hearing chilling true horror, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next nightmare. And most importantly, share this video with someone you think is brave enough to handle it. Because one thing's for certain: real horror doesn't need ghosts or monsters. Sometimes, real life is terrifying enough.